I think that it's important to understand the motives that have led to the ballooning of the detained population. So the orange line that you're looking at, it goes back to the first fiscal year after the creation of the Department of Homeland Security, right? So like the first year that the department was funded and the structure that it's funded today. And then the orange line charts the dollars appropriated every year specifically for ICE detention. And then the blue line charts the average number of people who ICE detained on any given day over the course of that year. So there's like a lot to digest in this chart. But the reason why I'm putting it up here for this conversation is because what you see is that, you know, for many years, really from the start of the agency, it's clear that agency behavior in terms of how many people ICE decides, because ICE has, we all know, has full discretion as to who and when and for how long to detain. ICE behavior on detention is driven in many ways by the dollars that they're given by Congress. So this isn't a situation where the dollars come and then, you know, the agency sort of takes its action and often feels comfortable to detain fewer people than they're funded. You do see at the end of these two lines, of course, a divergence, which, you know, really we see as an anomaly, because what that divergence is because of is the Trump era CDC order closing the border entirely to asylum seekers under the very sort of specious and harmful false public health narrative that invoked Title 42. So what happened then is that because no one was being allowed in at the end of the Trump administration, numbers really dropped. And as many of you probably know, if that line continued past the FY20 average, you would see that the numbers are now back up to approximately nearly 27,000 people in custody today, which is much, much closer to the 34,000 average population number that the agency is funded for right now. You know, I'll stop sharing there for a second to zoom it out for a little bit of context on appropriations. Many of you may know that for a long time, ICE's detention behavior was more explicitly driven by something called the bed quota. And that was from 2010 until 2016. Congress actually mandated that at least 34,000 approximately every year, you know, detention beds, quote unquote, be available for ICE to fill with humans. That mandate, ironically, after so many organizations and people, including many on this call, advocated for it to be lifted, was lifted in 2016 because the Trump administration began to see the mandate as a ceiling rather than a floor, and they wanted to be able to detain far more than 34,000. So we don't have the bed mandate anymore. Neither are detention numbers written into appropriations bills usually. We understand, and ICE understands, the number of people they're funded to detain based on a formula that appropriators use to provide the number of funding. So where we're at right now is that last year, finally, we began to see a bit of a downward trend line in the dollar amount provided to ICE by Congress. So the fiscal 2021 bill provided enough funding for an average of 34,000 people detained. Back to that bed mandate number, right? That number is one that, you know, I would have to say, like, the Democratic majority in the House has really tragically embraced. We then had the dip in actual numbers because of COVID, and many of us hoped that the Biden administration would really embrace the opportunity to begin to dismantle the system because of that low number. Instead, the numbers now creeping back up. And then surprising, at least to me, I think it came as a real surprise that when the White House released its budget, they requested a bed number very, very close to the number that the Trump administration had been funded to detain at the end of the administration. So that was 30,000 adult beds and 2,500 family short-term processing beds. This morning, the House brought its DHS appropriations bill through the Appropriations Subcommittee for markup. There are important policy provisions in that bill. NIJC and some of the groups on this call are part of the Defund Hate campaign, which is a coalition of organizations really laser focused on trying to cut funds for detention and enforcement on the ICE and CBP accounts. Our coalition is excited about a lot of policy provisions in that bill, but unable to muster much support or enthusiasm because the custody operations account for ICE, again, has a funding provision of 28,500 beds at a time when we really had hoped this administration would be taking the opportunity to move toward phase out.